There's always been a certain mystique surrounding Hollywood legends, and Charles Bronson is no exception. Known for his rugged demeanor and intense performances, Bronson captivated audiences with his tough guy persona. But was the man behind the stern face as unbreakable as the characters he played? The world thought it knew Charles Bronson, but a recent revelation from his daughter, Zuleika Bronson, has turned that idea on its head. Could the legend of the tough-as-nails actor have been masking a much deeper, more vulnerable reality? As his daughter reveals further backstories and truths about her father, she suggests that there is more to the man than what we saw on the screen. It goes without saying that most strapping men carry invisible scars, like Zuleika's insight about his upbringing and even relationships and personal fears. Charles Bronson, known throughout the world, has too many sides to it. And for the first time, these sides started revealing in a way that few people could ever have envisioned. Charles Bronson, originally Charles Dennis Bukinski, was raised in an environment that was far from the idyllic Harry Potter universe. Being born in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, his early life was faced with abject poverty and famine. And being the 11th of the 15 children, he was raised in the hell of ghetto urban life, without inside water, going to bed hungry, and even having to wear other people's clothes, including his siblings. A revelation made by one of his daughters lately was that even at school in his early years, he was forced to wear the daughter of a family friend's older dresses, as the family couldn't afford to buy him clothes. Such occurred to him not only as a source of embarrassment, but as one of those deep emotional hurts that would never heal. The most well-known and pleasant Bron, as the tough cowboy Bang, also made me miss his tenderness. You could say that the other Borgutson grew in him, all rounded out by the layers of his character that many could hardly have imagined. Henry Charles Albert Bellingham, also known as Charlie Boy, in stark contrast, was brought up in an environment that could not be more different from the fairy tale life enjoyed by stars of the 70s in Hollywood. For example, it is obvious the first few decades of his life in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, are plagued by unrelenting and unforgiving poverty. And as the 11th of the 15 children born in the family, he was born in a ghetto where there was no running water, serviceable food was rare, and everyone had to wear other people's clothes, even if it was siblings. A daughter has recently opened up and disclosed to the public that, at around 4 years old, he wore his sister's dresses to school because they were too poor to buy him any. All these, however, were a source of shame and unpleasant memories that hounded him for the rest of his life. Bronson suffered his share of neglect and harsh treatment as a child, even under the hard barrier he developed. Bronson's father, Walter Bronson, a Lithuanian immigrant, worked in the coal mines, and one day Charles would also work with him when he was just a little boy. It is his view that much of the family's physical and emotional abuse, particularly from Charles's father, molded his perspective of the world. Zuleika says that her father never quite managed to put the ghosts of his childhood behind him, which inhibited his ability to trust and bond with other people. From a very young age, Bronson had mapped out a path for himself along which he steadily progressed until he found himself supporting his family by working in the mines, as his father died when Bronson was only 10. The mines became his last school. He left the books behind and started working instead. But that also developed the unyielding spirit and resilient strength that would later become one of his trademarks as an actor. His daughter recalls, however, that he somehow always retained the coal dust of those years, even after the mines and Hollywood were in the past. Bronson experienced those times in the past with bitterness, though, since he felt that there was a childhood that he would otherwise have enjoyed but was robbed of, forcing him to age faster than he should have. Bronson's journey into the limelight was not an easy one. Prior to the Christopher Bronson we know, who had become one of the prolific actors of the era, the man had joined the U.S. Army Air Forces in the Second World War. Serving in the Army transformed his life significantly, and not only because he took pride in being a soldier. It also presented him with an opportunity not to work in the mines anymore. As Zuleika put it, he believed the Army was the only way out, an answer to the hardships he experienced as a young boy. Even though he did not know how to speak the English language at the time he joined the Army, even the armed forces equipped him with everything he needed to go beyond mere existence in the strange land. As a member of the Army, Bronson was a B-29 gunner participating in perilous missions that placed him at death's door. In this period, he acquired the discipline and hardiness that would later on be associated with his name. As Zuleika stated, though, even in the heroism, there was a nagging fear. In spite of his valor, Bronson experienced worries that were overwhelming, especially prior to the commencement of the missions. He, however, never showed any of these emotions, keeping them buried as he had done his entire life. Following the conflict, Bronson aimed for Hollywood. It was, however, a far cry from an overnight success, and new portfolios kept getting rejected. Success only came after the recommendation of Steve McQueen, who advised that Charles Bronson should be changed to Charles Bronson, a name that became immortalized in film history. The name alteration, however, came in the McCarthy period, when many of such Eastern-sounding actors were silenced. Hence, the change was not mere aesthetics, it was imperative. When Bronson established himself, the types of roles he accepted were always the ones that called for intensity and toughness. But Zuleika disclosed that her father's movie persona was not the same as the real man. He was a very rugged actor, appearing in a lot of tough and rough roles, yet in reality, Bronson was very shy and emotional, having a hard time even socializing. When he met fans, many of them noted how quiet he was, rather than boastful, as they anticipated the image of a tough man. In fact, even among his colleagues, Bronson was seen as a somewhat aloof figure. He didn't care for being social. Instead, he valued his solitude. Some of his colleagues found him challenging and uncooperative. Yet some, including McQueen, considered him a devoted comrade. According to Bronson's daughter, he had close relationships with certain individuals, particularly Jill Ireland, his second wife, whom he had met in the 1960s. Ireland became not only his wife, but also his on-screen co-star on a regular basis. Theirs was one of the longest marriages that survived the other up until the year Jill passed away due to cancer in 1990. Zuleika Bronson spoke about the events that followed her mother's death and how it affected her father. Although he was an emotional man, little by little, he did lose his wife and his children years later. Instead, he became even more reclusive, withdrawing from the world and struggling with his loss. He was, however, with Ireland until her passing, and their only child characterized their union as one based on true love and respect for each other. In spite of his hard shell, Bronson was a family-oriented individual, and these factors contributed to the fact that the passing of Jill left scars in Bronson's heart that he could never heal. But Bronson's weaknesses went beyond his domestic environment. Zuleika revealed some unexpected information concerning her father's fears and phobias. In particular, burning and flames were issues that terrified Bronson and affected his choices whilst working on movies. He would not occupy any hotel room located above the second level and would seek to film only in places that he perceived as safe. Alongside his fear of fire, which he expressed instead of phobia, he simply never shook hands on set with people. It was clear that he was more than just a quiet actor, since his appearance was very deceptive of his true person. The impression that many have of Charles Bronson is that of a stern one without complexity. In fact, his legacy is more nuanced than such. Below the violence and the shootouts was a person who had endured pain, suffering, and cared. His narrative purposely tries to prove to every reader that the fiercest of characters have the softest of hearts. And perhaps this is what endeared him to people, despite playing characters bigger than life. If this was as exciting for you as it was for us, please leave your comments on the below post. Make sure to watch more of our videos by subscribing, as you do not want to miss more exciting stories on the top-rated celebrities in Hollywood.